Okay, we're doing PARSHAT CHUKAT today, and the first sentence is a bit mysterious, as first sentences usually are. It's page 652 in the Hertz Chumash. Vayedaber Hashem el Moshe ve'el Aharon lemor. So God's about to make a proclamation to the Jewish people through Moshe and Aaron. How does he usually do it? He says, tell the Jews X, Y, or Z. Keep kosher, keep Shabbos, have faith in God. He tells them something. Here there's an introduction. Zot CHUKAT Torah. This is the chok, the absolute law of the Torah. Asher tzivah Hashem, which God commanded, saying again, speak to the children of Israel, and they should take parah adumah. They should take a red heifer. To me, upon which no yoke was ever put. So our first question is, why this introduction? This is the law of the Torah, which God commanded, saying. We have many things which are called chukim. For example, not to mix meat and milk, not to mix wool and linen in your clothes. That's called a chok. There's no introduction. This is the chok of the Torah, which God commanded, saying. So there must be something unusual going on here. Is this expression used anywhere else? Is there any place else in the Chumash? Where?
No, usually at the end of the parasha.
Yeah, they'll say these are the laws which God commanded, but these exact words, this is the chok of the Torah which God commanded. Do you have that any place else? If we find two of them, it might give us a clue as to what in the world it means, why it's there. No, not as far as I know.
It says in the
I wouldn't know this. I happen to look it up. Yeah, these are the statutes, the mishpatim. But where it says, this is the chok of the Torah, it's a funny expression. You don't say, Ela mishpatei ha-Torah. These are the mishpatim. This is a peculiar expression. So it does occur in one other place, which we will come to shortly. In Parshat Matos, after the Jews successfully waged war against Midian, when they tried to seduce the Jewish men through their women to their idols, we have Elazar HaKohen in chapter 31, verse 21. Numbers 31:21. Vayomer Elazar HaKohen el Anshe HaTzavah. He said to the people who made the war, chapter 31, verse 21, page 705. Zot CHUKAT Torah. This is the chok, the statute of the Torah, the exact same expression. This is the statute of the Torah, Asher tzivah Hashem et Moshe, which God commanded Moshe. And what's it talking about there? He says the things you captured, the eating vessels, anything which can go through fire, you put through fire. We learn about koshering things from the war with Midian, and about mikvah, and it has to be put through mei nidah, through water that would be used for nidah through a mikvah. So there has to be a purification process for food utensils which are taken from idolaters. Even if it's brand new, it has to go in the mikvah. And if it's used, if possible, to do so, you can kosher it. Okay? So that's the other place where it says, CHUKAT Torah, Zot CHUKAT Torah, Asher tzivah Hashem. These two places, no place else. So Rabbi Hirsch says, this indicates a great principle, that this is a basic thing of the Torah which is taught in this particular law. It's not just an arbitrary law, one of the 613. It's a basic law. So, koshering and toveling dishes is one basic law, and making the water of the red heifer to purify those who are contaminated by the dead is the other. Well, we'll see. Rashi brings that the word chok means a law of God which is virtually arbitrary, which we can't understand the reason for. Still, Rashi gives a reason. He quotes Reb Moshe Hadarshan, after the sin of the golden calf, let a cow come and make up for the calf. Like if a little kid spills something and makes a mess in your living room, the mother quickly goes to clean it up. So if the calf caused so much trouble, we bring the mother cow to clean it up. It's a very strange interpretation. But Rashi himself tries to give it meaning. Rabbi Hirsch disagrees with Rashi. Rabbi Hirsch says chok is not a law which you cannot understand, but chok is a law which is hard to understand because it's something which deals with symbolic experience and affects the human soul. You have to sort of know how the human soul really works to understand how a chok works. But it's not impossible to understand. It's just very, very difficult. That's what Rabbi Hirsch says. Before him, the Seporno gave a long explanation of the red heifer based on the idea that if you go to one extreme, you have to go to the other extreme to get back. But, for somebody who's normal to do any extreme messes them up. So therefore we have the concept that something can purify someone who is unclean and render unclean someone who is clean. For example, someone who's at one extreme who goes to the other extreme, that will purify him, get to the middle. But someone who is clean, who's normal, if he goes to any extreme, it will mess him up. That's the Seporno. Rav Hirsch takes a different tack. So let's go into the verses according to Rav Hirsch. Rav Hirsch says like this. First of all, there's a problem, and then we'll see what this general principle of the Torah might be. There's a problem with the first verse, as always. This is the statute of the Torah. Okay, second verse here. They shall take to you para aduma tamima asher ein bo mum, asher lo ala aleha ol. A red heifer, perfect, which has no blemish, which never had a yoke placed upon her. What's wrong with that verse? Is there one phrase in that verse which has something wrong with it? A red heifer, they should take a red heifer to you, meaning Moses inspects it, perfect, which has no blemish, which never had a yoke upon it.
Why it's never had a yoke upon it?
Yeah. Yeah, what did you say? Oh, yeah, two things. Yes, Chava, what were you going to say?
Yes, it's twice. It started faultless and without blemish.
Very good. There's an extra term here. Tamima is perfect. And Asher Ein Bamum, which has no blemish. There's another way of saying perfect. In fact, it's interesting. It just occurred to me the word Tamima might be related to Mum. Tamima has the same mem as Mum. Interesting. Yeah. So it's like another side of it. So why would it have to say doubly faultless, which has no imperfection? So what do the rabbis learn from this? That the word tamimah does not go on the cow as such, but it goes on the word before it. What's before it? Adumah. So it's adumah tamimah. Absolutely red. You got it? I might say a red cow. So as long as it's basically red, I call it a red cow. I say someone's a redhead even if they have some gray hair or a little bit black. But if it's basically red, I call them a redhead. But a red cow has to be adumah tamimah, perfectly red. And the rabbis say if there's more than one hair which is not red, it's disqualified. That's where they get it from, the word tamimah. Okay?
Mum is without VAT.
Without VAT, believe mom. I'll take Ramum Elamam. Who knows? Okay, so what's all this about?
Red means ginger, is it?
Huh? Red, yes. I do.
Ginger.
Yeah, what we call gingy. Actually, red means red. Red means red.
Such thing as the red guy.
Well, that's the problem. We don't have one right at the moment. We just don't have one now. That's exactly the problem.
It means gingy.
No, it means red, huh? Right, you can't build a Beit HaMikdash. Right, because you can't be pure without it. You can't build the Beit HaMikdash till you're pure. So therefore, the lack of a red heifer is holding us back, and they thought they found one on Kibbutz Chafetz Chaim, I believe it was, right after the Six-Day War. And everybody got all excited. Then after a little while, it wasn't perfectly red. Which could be that it might have been perfectly red, but since the people didn't do the real tshuva that should have come after the 6-day war, after that miraculous victory, so it changed. And maybe it was a perfect one, but it didn't stay that way. So anyway, by the way, does anyone know how many of these things there were? No, it's more. There were 9 altogether. And there's one more to come in the time of the Mashiach. Makes a minyan. So just remember, an easy way to remember it is a minyan. And here is women's lib, a women's minyan. The parah is a female heifer. It's not a male. So there will be altogether a minyan of them, and the Melech HaMashiach will bring number 10. Okay? There's a listing, I believe I have it on the Daf Parsha, of when they were brought, because they could keep adding water like a mikveh, and it lasted a long time. That means God's not ready for us to build a mikdash yet. Remember, the Ramban said the third Beit HaMikdash corresponds to the third well that Yitzchak dug. The first one was called Esek, and the second Sitna, contention and hating. The third one's called Rechovot, broad places, because God has made us room in the land. Nobody fought over the third well. The Ramban says nobody's going to fight over the third Beit HaMikdash. The Arabs will agree, the Christians will agree, no fights. The only way that that's going to happen, in my opinion, is if all the Jews shape up. If all of us shape up and they see we're really a holy people doing our job as a kingdom of priests and holy nation, they won't object. They'll be very glad that we're doing this for them, to bring them all back to the Garden of Eden, all back to God, all back to themselves. So that's, in my opinion, we haven't found the red heifer yet. The problem is not the red heifer. The problem, in my opinion, is we're not ready yet to build a mikdash. It's like giving a 15-year-old a car to drive. He's better off without the car. We may be better off without the Beit HaMikdash until we're in the right shape to make the Beit HaMikdash God's house rather than our house. What does God say? I will destroy your mikdash. It's not mine. How could God destroy his own house? It's not his own house. So we have to be in really good shape to have a Beit HaMikdash. And in my opinion, we're not quite there yet. No. Not quite. Okay. So what do we do with this thing? You give it to Elazar HaKohen. It's interesting. Elazar comes over there where it says Zot CHUKAT Torah, and he comes here where it's Zot CHUKAT Torah. And he takes it outside the camp, and he slaughters it lefanav. What's lefanav mean? In front of him. Who slaughters it?
It is slaughtered in front of him.
It doesn't say v'nishchat. It says he slaughters it. Who slaughters it?
Well, that's the other, according to him.
Then what's the fanav mean? You can't slaughter it by remote control. Maybe today you could. In those days you couldn't. Before God, the fanav. That's an interesting thought, but it's not. Where is this done? Does anyone know? Where do you do this whole business of the red heifer? Everybody, where? In the Mishkan, or later in the Beit HaMikdash, right? Wrong. Wrong. No. No.
In the wilderness.
It's done. You know where they did it? On the Mount of Olives. Har HaZeitim. It's not done in the holy place. It's deliberately done outside. Right? That's just what we read before. Okay? Yeah, outside of the camp. Right? Verse 3, Gimel. Give it to Elazar HaKohen. He should take it outside the camp, and it should be slaughtered in his presence. Or he should slaughter it in his presence. So it's not before God, probably. It's a good guess. It's an interesting idea, because before God usually denotes in the Mikdash or the Mishkan. So it means before Elazar. But if it's before Elazar, who is slaughtering it? So it can be somebody else. V'shachad, whoever is slaughtering it, should slaughter in his presence. So the way I'm reading it, in the simple way, is it slaughtered by a Kohen? Not necessarily. Just the Elazar, the assistant priest, or some say any priest, has to be present when it's slaughtered. However, some, like Rev Hirsch, learn that the assistant high priest himself slaughters it. If that is so, what's the fanav mean? Can you be somewhere and not be there? He has to be there. It has to be in his presence. He can't slaughter by remote control. Is that a correct statement? You can't be there or not be there. Either you're there or you're not there. If it's the Kohen himself who's slaughtering it, how can I say you should slaughter it in his presence, the fanav? He's there.
Now, why it was in front of him? Why should it say in front of him?
He's there. That's the question.
Don't do it behind him.
Yeah, if he'd be 15 miles away, so you'd have to broadcast it by television to him, by satellite, video. That's a possibility. But certainly at the time of the Torah, they had no way of doing such a thing by remote controls. He was there. So first of all, either you're there or you're not there. So I gave that interpretation, Mishahu. Misha Shochet. But Hirsch and some of the Gemaras don't agree with that. They say the Kohen does slaughter it. So the problem is, what's the fanav? So I'll tell you. Can you be there and not be there? Can you both be there and not be there? Is it? You can be, Tilly, you're right. Say it a little clearer, yeah, go ahead.
Your mind is not on what you're doing.
And then, are you there?
And yet your mind can be thinking about it.
So you're there, and you're not there, right?
Because we see it in the lecture, in the classroom.
That's right.
You're talking.
Are you here? Or are you someplace else? The teacher yells at the student who's dreaming of his date after the class. Are you here or aren't you here? I'm not here. I don't want to be here. Okay? So you, after all, I mean, children are in jail basically. All schools at some level are jails, and that the people are there involuntarily with someone they may or may not like. So the child tries to escape. How can he escape that jail? He'll get a whipping or he'll get in trouble if he's an obedient child. So he escapes inside. And how many a housewife escapes from her prison of daily work through romantic meanderings in her mind through a beautiful play or poem or book? So you can escape internally. And Yosef Mendelovich, while he's in Siberia, is in Jerusalem. He's in the Torah. At the same moment he's in Siberia, he's in the Torah. So it can be. Such a thing can be. So according to that interpretation, the Kohen has to be all there. The fanav in his presence means with absolute concentration. Not just consciousness, but concentration. He really has to put his mind to it as well as his hand. And we'll see why in a moment. We'll see why.
That it's really a red heifer.
No.
Moshe checked the red heifer. Moshe checked it, remember? They brought it before Moshe. The Kohen slaughters it.
Before he took it out.
It's an interesting point, though, Chava. Maybe he has to give a second check. I don't know. That would be a very interesting interpretation. Then, Elazar the Kohen, here it definitely says he does it, takes of its blood with his finger and sprinkles it toward the tent. He's outside the camp, say over on the Mount of Olives, and he sprinkles it in the direction of Kodesh Kodashim of the Parochas 7 times. Then the animal, which has now been slaughtered, and its blood sprinkled, is burnt. Le'einav, before his eyes. Here it's reasonably clear he's not the one who does it. Esorav, yes besara, its skin and its flesh, estama, pirsha, yisro. And its blood, along with its dung, the whole thing gets burned up. V'lakacha Kohen, now he takes some new substances. Now the Kohen again. The Kohen takes eitzeres, hyssop, cedar tree, v'ezov, and hyssop, ushni tolat, and crimson dyed wool with the worm from a tolat. Dyed wool. Wool dyed red. Okay? Red heifer, red thread. V'hishlich al tov.
Cedar is red wood. It's the reddest of all the woods.
Interesting. I never thought of that. Very nice. And he throws the cedar, the hyssop, and the red dyed wool. He ties a string of the red dyed wool around the cedar and the hyssop, like a little bouquet, and he throws that bouquet into the burning remnant of the parah, the heifer. V'chibes begodav hakohen, the Kohen becomes tamei. He has to wash his clothes and his flesh in water, and then he can come back to the machaneh, and he is tamei. The Kohen is tamei till the evening.
This is Eliezer.
Eliezer was here, yeah. Some say any Kohen, and I think some say only the assistant high priest or the high priest. Okay? Vasarefotam yechabes. Some say, by the way, in this case only the high priest didn't do it, Aaron, because he caused the trouble which this is supposed to atone for. According to that idea, this atones for the golden calf. We still don't quite know how, except they both happen to be bovine, but how a live cow atones for a golden calf is difficult to understand. But since Aaron's tolerance caused the calf, so he can't do this one. All right? So anyway, the one who burns it also washes his clothes in water and his flesh, and he's unclean to the evening. And the one, a new person, a person who is clean, gathers up the ashes of the heifer and leaves them outside the camp in a clean place, and it should be for the community, the congregation of the children of Israel, for something to guard and preserve. It's a water of purification once it's mixed with water. And again, the one who gathers the ashes washes his clothes, and he's unclean till evening. And it shall be for the Jews and the converts who come to them an eternal statute. Anyone who touches a dead body will be unclean 7 days. He purifies himself by sprinkling with this water formed from the ashes of the red heifer on the 3rd day and the 7th day. This 3rd day of purification is a new concept. By Nida and so forth, Zava, you don't have 3rd days, you have 7 days. Here you have a 3rd day, and then he becomes clean on the 7th day.
What does he do with the heifer water?
The water is sprinkled on the person who is Tameh on the 3rd day and the 7th day when he becomes clean.
The problem to me was they took so much water, which is prescribed for the Kohanim to wash their hands and their feet, and after all kinds of svachim, they have to take water. Where do they take it in the midbar?
From Miriam's well, and everything is fine until a little later in the parsha, and then there's problems. You just raised a very interesting interpretation. Maybe the people are fetching, not just because they won't be water to drink, but because they won't have water for these rituals which are essential to purify them and achieve atonement. Could be.
No, but it is a problem, really. Very often it says the kibeses megadark, the kibeses. Could they take so much water?
I don't know if it's so much water. Maybe they all...
Always the Kohanim have...
Yeah, it's only a ritual.
It is ritual.
Yeah, but say they had a little mikveh, a portable mikveh or something. Who knows how they did it exactly? But how big would it have to be? A couple barrels?
In the desert?
Yeah. I don't know. Mikveh on wheels is a funny concept.
In the desert there were thousands of people, and they had water.
No. You mix the ashes with water. Like when you make tea, you simply mix it in, okay?
Can I give her a little candy? It's a elite.
Okay, just throw it over.
I have another question.
Yes. Okay, we interrupt the class to give my daughter candy. Fine. That's in the spirit of charity, which is characterized by the Torah. Yeah. Let's just finish this 1 second, okay? Yeah.
It's exactly in this house.
Yes.
Just a short question.
Sure.
My question is only, usually our kosher laws are very humane.
Uh,
Don't do anything to an animal, tsar bal chayim. And here, you burn a living...
No, he shechted first. Shechted first, remember? First we shechted him, then we sprinkled the blood, then we burned the remains. Okay? Oh, we'll understand this very nicely by the time we're done. And it won't take so long. And if anyone has difficulty understanding it, I'll repeat it 4 o'clock this Shabbos at the Emunah Women, number 18, Yeshishkin. Okay. Now, again. Now, there's no crime if anybody is unclean. If you're unclean, so you're unclean. As long as you don't go near the Beit HaMikdash. But since you should go to the Beit HaMikdash, and it's nice. So, verse 13, we're at 19:13. Whoever touches the dead, the body of anyone's dead, and doesn't purify himself by this process, then he will have defiled the Mishkan of Hashem if he goes into it.
So I was going to say,
And he'll be cut off, that soul, from Israel, because the water of sprinkling wasn't put against him, dashed on him. He's unclean. And if a man dies in the tent, this, by the way, is the difference between a Gentile corpse and a Jewish corpse. A Gentile corpse also renders one unclean. It's a human being. A Gentile corpse, any human dead person, renders one unclean with contact of any part of that dead person. However, only a Jewish dead person has more power of defilement, that you become unclean even in the same building with the dead person, but even though you don't touch him. Okay? So that's this next verse 14. Even though you don't touch him. That's right. In the same tent, basically. There's all kinds of definitions of what constitutes the same building. They make special doors and partitions so Kohanim can go into Hadassah Hospital. And the Hadassah engineers are experts in that. But it says anyone who comes into the tent and everything in the tent shall be unclean 7 days. But every open vessel which does not have an airtight cover on it, like a pottery vessel, is unclean. That if anything is in it, it becomes unclean if it's open.
so you say it's not bad to be unclean, just that you can't go to the Beit HaMikdash?
Right. It's not nice to be that way, but there's no sin in being unclean.
If there is, if that's the way it is, how about for the last 2,000 years and they hadn't happened?
Right. So it's no sin. No one sinned by being unclean,
No,
but
surely you must
it's not nice. I mean, obviously, this state of purity, we're not speaking of physical cleanliness, but a certain spiritual called Tumen Tahara, this state should be achieved, because in such a state you can get closer to God inside, you can perceive things better, but it's no sin to be unclean. And then, if you're out in the open field and you touch, again, someone who died, or even a bone or a grave, there's 7 days uncleanness. And then for whoever's unclean, they take of the ashes of the burning of the purification from sin. Serefet hachata. Let's look at this verse a second. Verse 17. V'lachula tameh, they shall take for the one who is unclean, me'afar serefet hachata, from dust or ashes of the burning of the what? Of the what? That's not the word that's used here for it, though. What's it called? Sin offering. So here Rav Hirsch says you see a clue to what this whole thing is about. It's called a sin offering, implying somebody has sinned. Who? How? Huh? Fine, that was one time, but this is throughout history. There's 9 Poradumas so far, and they're called Chatat, a sin offering. And he puts on it live water, water from a flowing source. A still river is a question, a bubbling brook is fine. El Kelly, into a utensil. And then he takes the hyssop and dips it into the water. Remember, the water already has thrown into it hyssop and cedar and scarlet thread, a bouquet. And now you take another piece of hyssop and dip it into this mixture, someone who is clean, and sprinkle it on the tent and on all the utensils and on all the souls who were there, or someone who touched a bone or a part of a dead body or a grave. And someone who's clean sprinkles on the unclean on the 3rd day and on the 7th day, and he becomes clean on the 7th day and washes his clothes and his flesh with water, and in the evening he will be clean. And a man who is tameh and doesn't go through this process will be cut off from the community if he defiled God's holy place. Yes. Yeah, right. V'hayata lahem, and this should be to them, for the children of Israel, the CHUKAT olam, an eternal statute. 1987 as well as then. Umazeh me'anidan, the one who sprinkles the water, also has to wash his clothes. And the one who touches this water, even though it purifies, yitmad is unclean till the evening, except if he's actually pouring it. And if a person is tamei from a dead body touches someone else, he transmits the unclean state. Okay? So that's the red heifer, chapter 19. Then we go on to other matters. So what does all this mean? So Hirsch's first clue, the longest explanation, about 10 pages, is that given by Rev Hirsch. Rev Hirsch says like this. Two things are noteworthy here. What is there in common about being a para, about being aduma completely, about never having a yoke, okay, and about not having any blemishes? What is in common about all that? Perfection. Is it just perfection? Redness is not perfection. You can be perfectly black or perfectly white.
Very nearly impossible. It's an impossible.
Fine, but what is there in common about all these things? As I respond to them, what is in common in man's reaction to all these things? The para means 3 years old at least, when it itself can have children, when she can have babies. Aduma is red. Tamima is no blemishes. Never had a yoke means not only didn't it ever work, but they never even stuck a yoke on it. What does all that symbolize together? Perfection, yes, maybe not.
It's very hard to do.
It's hard. But what does it symbolize? Life, vitality. It's all red. Red is the color of life, of blood, of liveliness. People who don't want to be lively forbid red dresses in their society, right? By a certain sects of, not just Lubavitch, most of the Haredi society, it's not sanua to wear a red dress, but you may take a little red ribbon to Rachel's grave as a magic potion. Now, why no red dresses? I mean, what's wrong with a red dress as opposed to, it's too lively, it's too alive. You're looking to live too much, maybe. Something. So, all right, whatever they feel. Prostitutes may wear it in some society, but then the question is, why would a prostitute wear red? Because again, it symbolizes life and vitality and
Fresh innocence of youth.
fresh innocence of youth. The little girl gets patent leather red shoes and a little red dress and a red hat until she goes off to Beis Yaakov, right? So then she gets a little black patent leather shoes and a little gray and white checker dress, and she goes into a new stage of existence. So red symbolizes somehow vitality, lust, life. What does para, 3 years old, the ability to have babies, also means the prime of life, the young mating years. What does no blemish? Really healthy, Pashat, healthy, alive, nothing wrong with it, flourishing. So and never had a yoke. Not only was its body in no way dead, but its spirit was never killed. Once you're toilet trained, you're just never the same, right? Already restraints are put on you. What's the Song of Marie Chevrolet? Thank heaven for little girls, right, Golly? Right? Now, why do they say thank heaven for little girls? Who was just as pretty at 100, or at 20 rather, as she was at 7? Remember? Me'ayata yafa, kabat mea kamo tova, kabat mea kabat aslim, ve'yafa bat aslim kabat sheva. Sarah. So what do we say? Sarah was as pretty at 20 years old as she was when she's 7. So what's the most beautiful time? You're more than innocent. It's unfettered. There's no yoke. There's no fears. The epitome of feminine charm and feminine beauty is around the age of 7. All right? Thank heaven for little girls. After that, they get craftier and held back, and they have to be cautious and worried, and maybe someone's trying to take advantage of them, and you must make sure you have good manners. You make sure you do everything properly. But at the age of 7, ain bayot. So that could be the same idea. A frisky young puppy before it's trained, and a frisky young heifer, red, without blemish, which never even had a yoke put on it. It has that life, that freedom, which never will be again. All right? So Hirsch says this all symbolizes life. Life at its best. What happens to life at its best? the most perfect, the most lively, the most blemish-free spirit and body, what happens to it?
Gets his throat cut.
When? Right? It gets its throat cut. When? Sooner or later. Sometimes sooner, sometimes later. Like the Pennsylvania Dutch say, too soon old, too late smart. It gets its throat cut. That's what happens here. And by the way, that's Hirsch's message. That's Hirsch's message exactly. You slit its throat. It gets shechted. It gets slaughtered. Now, the logotherapy school of psychology, Viktor Frankl, one of his techniques is to cure people's phobias and fears is to face up to that phobia and fear. On the contrary, not only not to deny it or ignore it, but to emphasize it, to hit it right on. Hirsch says like this: when someone experiences death, now these are the two clues, the strange term chatat and the very life essence of this animal whose throat is about to be slit. Is not so delicately and beautifully put it. Now, Hirsch says like this: when I experience death by actual contact with part of a dead human, or being in the same room, in the same enclosure, in the same place as the dead human, I must have a feeling that there is no free will in this world. As Kohelet says, who knows the superiority of man to animal? And Hirsch might translate it, for we see the same thing happen to all of them. Our experience, our visual, our visceral, our sense experience is the same thing that happens to the animal, happens to the human. All biological matter, no matter how alive, how healthy, comes to the same end. The same. It can be the greatest thing in vegetable nature, a cedar tree. It can be the lowest thing in vegetable nature, a lowly bunch of hyssop. It can be the highest thing in the animal kingdom, the fleece, the wool of a sheep. Or the lowest thing in the animal kingdom, that red dye with which it's dyed, which comes from a lowly worm. They all get thrown into the water of the red heifer. They all go to the same place. So the first stage in restoring the faith and spirit of one who has been demolished by contact with death, who has become tameh, is to acknowledge it, to actually act out that experience. Death comes to everything. Now, once we do that, we begin the restoration process. And it's so bad, Hirsch says, that you call it a sin offering. At some place in his being, man must lose some faith in contact with death. He must get the feeling that there is no free will, there is no way I can transcend my brief animal state. And everything loses significance. And existential despair centers in as universal man proclaims, Ad de lo yada, the pessimistic existentialist of Camus and the Frenchman. Whereas we Jews also say that. We know nothing, we can't be sure about anything. Ad de lo yada, and we celebrate it on Purim. And we celebrate it on the other day, Kippurim, Yom Kippurim, when we also say we know nothing. Who will live, who will die, who will be healthy, who will be sick, who will be rich, who will be poor, and we call the Yom Simcha. Why? Because it doesn't matter if I don't know anything and can't be sure about anything. There's a God in the world who is good. All right? But in contacting death, I lose some of that faith because I'm so taken by my visceral sense impressions that indeed there is no free will. All there is the body, and the body is finished. So the restoration process starts from this almost involuntary sin, like the involuntary sin offering of the new mother, who must experience helplessness and inadequacy and loss of free will when she faces the formidable task of raising a child, which no one is really capable of, and which everyone must make some great mistakes in. Or as the rabbis say, when she involuntarily curses the husband who caused all that pain which she is now having, I want to wash that man right out of my hair. Whatever it is, there's such a thing as almost compulsory negative feelings and lack of faith in the person at times. In order to start out clean and get back on the road again, we have a certain type of sin offering. Not a major one. We sprinkle you a bit. The woman brings some birds. But still, a purification process is needed. So we start by sprinkling that blood after acknowledging that all life, from the highest to the lowest, from the liveliest to the living dead, it all comes to death. But when we sprinkle that blood, be with you in a minute, Danny, when we sprinkle that blood in the direction of the Beit HaMikdash, you can't go into the Beit HaMikdash at this stage. First, you got to function back as a normal person. First, you just got to recognize life for what it is and go on. So you stand outside. You face the Mikdash, but you're outside. You're in the Mount of Olives. And then you sprinkle. The Kohen does it. And the Kohen himself can have no contact with death because he's the one who has to cheer everybody else up, give everybody else spirit. If you'll knock him out, if the rabbi has no faith, who's going to have faith? So the Kohen, we tell to keep away from death, except for the closest relatives. And the Kohen Gadol, even the closest relatives. The Kohen must not lose his spirit, except for one thing. When he has to help pick up someone else who's really fallen down low by contact with death, he goes out and makes himself unclean in order to prepare this liquid for this process. Okay? Just like Moshe comes down from Sinai, the peak Kolel experience, to rescue the Jews in the bar room in the cafe of the golden calf. So then we sprinkle the blood in the direction of the temple, and on the third day, he gets sprinkled. Life, the soul is turned toward God, toward eternity, showing that blood, the flesh and blood, can join God, can join eternity. And on the third day, we try to get him back into normal life, like the 3 days of moaning and crying for a velut. Then you comfort more. On the third day, he gets back into normal life because the third day symbolizes normal biological life and death. Because the third day is when God creates all growing plant matter. Okay? Then the seventh day, which links normal life with the realm of 8, with the realm of transcendent, eternal life, he gets sprinkled again. Then he's okay. You had a question, Dan.
I was going to say that this whole thing about contact with death and sin offering, maybe it goes back, when in the first time, when the first parents sinned, in Gan Eden, and then God is trying to remind man that tomei, uncleanliness, and
sin
death is not normal, and then they look for the age of the Mashiach, and death will be abolished.
Wonderful. That's another version of the rabbis. When we talk about anything, sooner or later everybody comes up with all the rabbinical views. This is another view which is found in some Mefarshim. Some Mefarshim say that the death connection here is because with sin is that, as Danny just said so eloquently, that if there were no sin, there would have been no death. It's perpetuating Adam's sin that we're somehow, not because Adam sinned, we're condemned. We don't have such doctrines. But because we're still in that state, because we haven't done tshuva, so there's still death in the world. So death itself suggests to man that he's not living as he should. Because if he were, there'd be no death. Very nice. That's another aspect of it. Okay, yeah.
You have one carbon, and you have all these sinners coming to...
So you take a little of the water for each one. There's a lot of ashes, and you keep adding water from what I understand. As I say, in the whole history, Moshe's lasted for quite a long time. In the whole history, they only made 9 paradumas. And the 10th one's supposed to be made Yemot Mashiach, which is an indication you won't need it so much then, if one will suffice. Okay? Now, so that was a nice review of the red heifer. And now it's not so mysterious, and it's not so strange, fitting Hirsch's idea that a chok is just something symbolic which works on the soul of man, and you have to analyze what's going on in the man's soul and what this thing does symbolize, and then you'll have the picture. Now, back to our original question, why does the Torah give us the grand introduction? This is CHUKAT Torah, which God commanded, according to Hirsch, because this illustrates a great, great principle of the Torah, that man can overcome death. And I would add something to Hirsch's words. We have the term chok used also by chukot hateva. Whether they make sense to you or they don't, whether you like them or you don't, there are arbitrary absolute laws of science governing the world created by the God of nature, Elohim 86, which equals Hateva, nature. Okay? Whether you like the laws of physics, the laws of biology, the laws of chemistry is irrelevant. You better know them and act in accordance if you want to live okay. So I would say, Zot CHUKAT Torah Asher Tziva Hashem. Yes, it's true. There are biological laws which are inescapable. Laws of death. Everything has to die. The liveliest, the highest, the lowest. They all come to the same end. They all wind up in the same liquid. The cedar, the hyssop, the worm, and the lamb, and the red heifer. However, Chok l'sam v'lo ya'avor, God's law of nature has other equivalent and even stronger laws, God's laws which transcend nature. As the Maharal of Prague would put it, God's supernatural system of law. And this is the Chok of the Torah. According to science, there is no real hope. The end is the end. But there is a whole ceremony which embodies a whole philosophy, which embodies a whole law of God, that the soul of man has its own laws. And that's the Chok of the Torah, not the Chok of the Madah. And the Chok of the Torah says, despite death, despite the way everything looks to your senses, you can transcend the whole realm and enter into eternity with God. This is CHUKAT Torah. And when we come to the Midianites and the sanctification of their Kalim, it's a similar thing. Another major principle in this world of the Torah, besides the eternity of the soul, its ability to transcend and overcome nature, another basic aspect is that Jews are different. All people have human dignity, all people have sanctity, they're all in the image of God, but Jews are different. And that's maybe why it says also, by the process of putting kalim in a mikveh, which belonged to an idolater, that somehow, and it's against scientific explanation, scientifically, a Jewish person is a person like any other person. You don't see anything different about him. Michelangelo may have thought they had horns, some may have thought we had tails, who knows what. There are many tales about us. However, there still is a difference. The difference is not in the realm of chukot hateva, of biological laws, but CHUKAT Torah, in the system of the Torah, which comes from the even higher aspect of God than the system of nature, there's a difference. So that might be some explanation of those special phrases. And that, of course, relates to Moshe Rabbeinu. One version of his sin in not sanctifying God at the waters of Merivah, one version of his sin is indeed that Moshe shouldn't have waited for God to come to him. He should have shown the people that the power of the tzaddik, the power of the great person of Torah, of Moshe Rabbeinu, is such that he can overcome any natural problem. There are chukot hateva, and everybody who has limited themselves to the level of nature, of teva, of mammal, albeit the refined mammal, is subject to those laws. But the one who's united with God, as Moshe, transcends those laws. So Moshe, as soon as there was a problem with no water, Moshe shouldn't have even waited for God. He should have said, hey, rock, give some water. Right away. I want water. And he did do it when he was upset last week by Korach. If this man will die like any other man, these men, then God didn't send me. Let the earth open up and swallow him up, and it happened just as he said. From what we see in the text, he didn't wait to ask God. Tzaddik goes there, v'HaKadosh Baruch Hu mekayem. A true tzaddik can decree something, and God enacts his decree, because he synchronized his will with God already. So that's one version of Moshe's sin. Others argue against that very much. They say, all the other times in Egypt and so forth, Moshe waits for God's order. Moshe doesn't produce miracles on his own. It's not simple. But there's two sides to it. And that brings us to another aspect of this, according to Rev Hirsch, that before the Jews suffer the tragic blow of the deaths of Miriam and Aharon, God already gives them the refuah, the cure, before the makkah, before the blow strikes. He gives them the red heifer and its ability to pull them out of their state of helplessness and hopelessness and existential despair so that they can carry on when they suffer the greatest losses that they've ever suffered until now, Miriam and Aharon. And as soon as Miriam dies, all of a sudden there's a water problem, and the rabbis state that the miraculous well which accompanied them in the desert, was due to the merit of Miriam. We see how great she was. And when she died, it stopped until Moshe revived it through prayer. Okay? And then God tells Moshe what to do. Let's get on to Moshe's sin. 1 second. So we finished chapter 19. Then the Jews come into the wilderness of Zin. Miriam died. There's no water. They fetch. They said we should have died back there when everybody else died by the Meraglim and Korach. Why'd you bring us? We're going to die here. Why do we have to come out of Egypt in the first place? You didn't bring us to a good place. Moshe and Aaron fell on their faces, and God's glory appeared, intervened to save them. Okay? And God spoke to Moshe, saying, we're already up to 20, verse 7. Okay?
20, verse 7.
Chapter 20, verse 7. Please stay seated. You could say, please rise at this point. Okay. And the Lord spoke to Moses. Now listen carefully. Here we come to the water problems. Kach es hamateh. Take the stick. Va'kel es ha'edah. And gather the congregation together. You and Aaron, your brother, and speak to the rock, v'dibartem el hasela, li'eineihem, in their eyes, in their presence. V'nasam meimav, and it will give its water. V'otzesa lahem mayim, and bring out water for them. That's an extra phrase. That's a difficult one. We already said it will give its waters. So what's you will take out for them water? Maybe it means enough to give them all. Min asela, from the rock. V'hishkisa es ha'eda, give them drink. So then again, what's you shall take out for them water? V'et biram, and their animals, they should have plenty. And Moshe took the stick. Was he told to do that? Yes. Yes, we just said, God said take the stick. What stick it is, there's a bunch of versions. Moshe's stick, Aaron's stick, another stick. You look at Aryeh Kaplan, the Living Torah. He has the versions of which rock and which stick. Okay? So he took it, midifnei Hashem, from before God, kasher tzivo, as he commanded him. So this first stage, Moshe clearly did nothing wrong. He did everything right. Vayakila Moshe v'Aaron as a kahal. And they gathered all of the people together, El Panei HaSola, in front of the rock. Vayomer lahem, and said to them, Shimona, listen here, Hamorim, rebels. Amin HaSela Hazeh notzi lechem mayim. From this rock we shall take water out for you. Vayara Moshe et yodo, he lifted up his hand. Vayachet HaSela b'mateo pamayim, and he hit the rock twice with his rod. Vayetzu mayim rabim, and much water came out. Vatesh ta'eda, and he gave drink to the community, uve'iram, okay, and to their cattle. Fine.
But he was angry.
Yeah? Yeah?
And hit the rock twice.
He rebels.
Where?
And before he even is thrown,
Where does it say he was angry?
he was angry in number 10.
Where does it say it? What's it say? He said to them.
Yomer lahem, Shimona Hamorim.
Is this the first time he bawled them out? No. Does it say he was angry? Do you think he was angry?
No, but it
Hamorim.
Do you think he was angry, Chava?
yeah.
You think so. But you can't prove it, right?
Well, he hit the rock twice, he had to be angry.
Yeah, he hit the rock twice, he had to be angry, or it simply didn't work the first time.
Well, no,
Maybe he wasn't there. Remember from before? Maybe Moshe wasn't there, just like by the red heifer. The fanav, he's got to be there in his presence of mind. So maybe Moshe, the first time, was a little shook up by all this and didn't concentrate enough.
I don't think so. I think so that
He,
he was
yeah.
commanded to do a thing, and he didn't do that thing. He
What did he do?
He was told to speak to the,
demanded
not to hit it.
oh, here it is.
Oh, he was told to speak to it and not to hit it. So why did he take the stick?
and
And he
apart
was
from
told
that,
to hold
he
the
should
stick,
have,
and
he
he
should
wasn't
have,
told to hit
he
it.
should have shown him.
So why does he take the stick for? It's very interesting, by the way. Sure.
Yeah, but it
So you're
says-
supposed to hit it with the stick.
It says right here, he did it in the,
Yeah?
in a moment of frustration,
Did what?
irritation.
How do you know?
It says it here.
Who says it? Rabbi Hertz says it. Rabbi Hertz, one of the first graduates of the Jewish Theological Seminary of America, he's not God. Right. So God wanted him to hit the rock?
No, but he wanted that the people
Just
know-
take it. Why would you just take a stick?
Yeah.
So we've gone over now the Rambam, Rashi, a lot of the Ramban, or Achayim. Just by, it always seems to work out this way, that before I tell you what they all said, and I quick interjected each one's objections to the others. Chava was the Rambam. The Rambam says in Moreh Nevuchim that the sin of Moshe was he got angry. And the Rambam says back to him, where does it say it? Doesn't say he got angry. He told them off, but we tell off our children often without being angry.
But you interrupted me. It's not only that he got angry, he did not show the people that God gives them the water. He did as if he gave them the water because he used the stick.
But what's wrong with, all right, so he used it twice because it didn't work the first time, but God told him to take the stick. So Rashi says the trouble is, as you said too, he wasn't supposed to hit the rock, he was only supposed to talk to it. But then what do you take the stick for? So that's already answered. It's a sign of authority. That the stick was just... Yeah, but wait, is this the first time he hit the rock for water?
No, but here,
And the other time was okay.
if you
So
read
if the other time God said take the stick and hit the rock, and now God says take the stick, so he probably means again hit the rock.
here it is. in
You
the
see, it's not simple, any of this. Each theory is possible, and each theory I can bring big questions on. All right? Some say, close to what you were saying, what does Moshe say to them? Yeah, this is what the Ramban likes. If I remember, it's from Rabbinical Seminary. The Ramban reviews all his predecessors, and he says they're all wrong. All right? There's nothing wrong with hitting a stick. That's why God doesn't take it. Doesn't say he got angry. He says the Rambam, our great teacher, makes no sense here. The Ramban talks like that. Like he can revere someone, but if that someone says something that makes no sense to him, he says it's all wrong, even though he lived 100 years before or whatever. Just the fact someone lived some time ago and you have great reverence for him doesn't mean you always say he's right. Okay?
What
So
does the Rambam say?
Rambam says it's anger.
It's anger.
Yeah, Rashi says, as I recall, the problem is hitting. Some say it's hitting twice. They should only hit once. Then the Ramban and Rabbinical Seminary, they say all the ones before us were wrong, and the real thing is they said, shall we take water out for you from this rock? They should have said, shall God take out? What's note C? We shall take out? It's not them doing it. And then a couple hundred years later comes the Orach Chaim, and he reviews the 10 views which came before him. And he says, that's not so good either. Because when they say, shall we take out water for you, they mean we as God's agents, because the people know by this time in the desert that everything that Moshe and Aaron do is as God's agents. So they don't have to send these shows by going out of Egypt. Moshe also says what we're going to do, implying what God's having us do. So the Orach Chaim rejects them, and he says Moshe is criticized for 4 things. You rebelled, you didn't sanctify me, and so forth. He says Moshe misinterpreted God's command in one thing, and that messed up the rest. He meant well, but he misinterpreted. Then I'll ask, still later on the Orach Chaim, so if he just misinterpreted, why should he be punished so much? God says you won't go into the land and so forth. Very difficult. God says you won't go into the land. Let's just finish that part up. All right? And God says to Moshe in 20 verse 12 and to Aaron, because you didn't have faith in me, Ya lo hamantam bi. That's a controversy. Either because you didn't have faith. Wait. Look at it carefully. Better, it's he feel. It's a causative verb. Because you did not cause faith in me. You didn't inspire the people. You didn't ha'emantem. You didn't cause to have faith. He feel. Causative. Got it, Mr. Shapiro? It's a he feel verb, not a pa'al. It doesn't say Yana Sherlo emantem. It says ha'emantem. So you didn't cause the people to have faith. By acting impatient and angry, you made it that the people weren't turned on. You had faith, but you didn't transmit your faith.
But I want to add something.
Excuse me, that would explain this very nicely. Moshe and Aaron died then, not because they sinned. They had faith. But they already were too impatient. Whatever was wrong, they were burnt out. And they no longer could inspire the people and do the job. So they were retired, just like when Elijah gets frustrated and angry. He's retired, and in comes Elisha, who does a little here, a little there, a yittle here, a yittle there. very patiently and slowly, not trying to pull it off all at once and getting angry and frustrated when the grand demonstration fails. All right, so God says, Yan, Lo ha'amantem bi lahaktisheni, you didn't cause faith in me to sanctify me, li'enei b'nei Yisrael, in the eyes of the children of Israel, L'chein lo taviu et hakol hazel ha'aretz. It doesn't even say you won't come to the land. You will not bring them to the land. And the Midrashim then say, Moshe says, okay, I won't be the leader. And God shows him what it would feel like to have Joshua get the divine communications and he wouldn't be in on it. He never wanted to be leader, but once he was leader, he could never live happily as a regular person again. Midrashim say that. So he says, you will not bring this people to the land which I gave them. These are the waters of contention where the children of Israel contended with God. It's not Moshe they're really after. They know already after Korach, Moshe's the chosen Aaron. So they already are attacking God almost directly. And they're angry at God and Moshe and Aaron as his emissaries. Vayikadesh bam. So the only way God was sanctified was through them, through Moshe and Aaron. When the people saw the decree on Moshe and Aaron that there's no protection and there's only God, that somehow shaped them up too. And indeed, we have before this, that it said that Moshe will not go into the land.
That's right.
By the Meraglim, I pointed out to you, by the
There are
spies.
many reasons,
Yeah.
not just
But the main thing, and again, it's that same idea. Once the Meraglim can turn the people off from Moshe, that means Moshe has lost it. Moshe no longer is really the leader. And he has to be retired. But God gives him another chance here at the waters of Meribah, where he could somehow at least inspire the new generation. We're now in the 40th year. Miriam died. It was either 1st of Nisan or the 10th of Nisan. If I recall, Miriam died. We're in the 40th year. So with the new generation, all right, Moshe lost that generation. If he somehow could have perpetually inspired, or at least re-inspired, this new generation to go into the land, he could have been their leader. But he couldn't pull it off, or he didn't pull it off.
It was 120 years, he's getting tired.
Yeah, I was tired. He was burnt out, might be the better term. You get to a point.
Well, he went through so much.
Yeah.
Extremely lonely. He lost Aaron and Miriam, the only
He was
people
tired of
He,
that
he hasn't, he's losing Aaron the next page. He's got one page to go to lose Aaron, but he's lost Miriam, right?
He lost Aaron and Miriam. He never
You could. That's it.
anybody in the world to whom to talk on his level.
Very good. I thought of this once. I remember last year that maybe Moshe is also affected by Miriam's death. Not just the people, but Moshe himself. If he can't save his own sister, who saved him, and she was like the mother to him. And that's another theme, by the way. Sometimes when someone loses a parent, they're really inconsolable, but they get over it because there still remains a brother or sister who takes over the personality and role of that parent. Then you suddenly see a big mourning when that brother or sister die, because that's really the end of the mother or father. Yeah? I've seen this. You sometimes have a mother who someone's very attached to, and the mother passes away and it's terrible, but there's a sister alive who is like mother. She's got her spirit, she's got her appearance, and then she goes on for many years. When she dies, then mother is really lost, and a new heavy mourning sets in for that mother who you partially lost years ago. Okay?
How old was Miriam when she died?
Miriam here, she's older than Moshe. Aaron is 123 at his death, which is happening in another page. Yeah, so she's a bit over 123. She's over 123. Okay? Now, so back to Moshe's sin. So I call it burnout rather than sin. I don't even like the Orach Chaim's interpretation. I want to add one other interpretation, that of Shadal. Shmuel David Lutzato was hundreds of years after the Orach Chaim, a more modern commentator, and he's a prolific commentator who has a lot to say.
Lutzato.
Yes. He said,
When was he?
he was not long ago, a few hundred years ago. Something like that. 17, 1800, I don't remember exactly. Lutzato said like this. He said, no, I was ready to tackle this passage and try to figure out what Moshe did wrong. When I went through the Mefarshim, I saw that they've already attributed at least 13 sins to him. Remember, by the Orach Chaim's time, he had 10 listed according to his predecessors. He says, Moshe did one sin. The rabbis have already found 13. It's enough. I will not comment on this passage. And Shadal skipped this passage. I will not comment on this passage. They found enough sins for Moshe already. He did one and they found 13. It's enough. Okay. Now, it's enough, and we finished Moshe's sin. Right after it, it says Moshe sent messengers to the king of Edom to let the Jews, their brethren, go through their land. And the glory of Moshe is here. After losing his right to go into Israel because of this stubborn people, right away he goes out to work to do the best for them anyway. It's a very simple message here. So Moshe goes to the king of Edom. He says, we've had trouble in Egypt, all the suffering, and God brought us out, and God's with us. Let us go through your land. Won't drink anything. We'll just go on the superhighway. And Edom said, no, and I'll come out with a sword if you do. And then he said, let's go along the highway in the ditches, on the side road. If we take anywhere, we'll give you a good price. You'll make some money. He said, no. And Edom came out against him with many people and a strong hand. He didn't attack him, but he was there at the border to kill him if they crossed the border. So Israel turned away from him. And they journeyed from Kadesh, and they came to Mount Hor. And God said, at this point, Aaron shall die. Now, what's so terrible about Edom anyway? What's so terrible, in my opinion, they ate, they drank, God gave them the manna, they got the water back. What's terrible is he prolonged the journey. He just prolonged the journey. Two things. The Jews are already tired from 40 years wandering in the desert. Now, because of Edom, they have to wander more. A. B. B, they see that this great mission of theirs, to be Mamlechet Kohanim B'Goy Kadosh, a kingdom of priests and a holy nation, is even rejected and fought against with a sword by their own brothers, the people of Esav, the people of Edom, the so-called civilized people in the world, the Austrians and the Germans and the French and so forth. So even their own brother rejects them and wants nothing to do with them. And they realize now not just that the desert that they're in is going to be a bit longer path because of Edom, but, excuse me, the whole desert of history until that day, Vayomahu, Shiyeh Hashem Echad U'Shemo Echad, is going to be a long desert too, because they never really want the Jews in their message. They want to remain savages. Even those who proclaim they're close to God with their church, even Edom, even Esav, doesn't want the Jews going near him. Until that day comes, V'olu Moshe B'Har Tzion Lishpotes Har Esav, as the Tanakh says, there will come a day when Savior shall come up on Mount Zion, on the Temple Mount, to judge the mountain of Esav. And then God will be one, his name one. He doesn't want to hurt Esav or Edom. He just wants to destroy their mountain, their pretensions to glory, that they transcend this world. They don't need the Jewish people, God's messenger, God's priest. So that false mountain will be toppled. And then the true mountain will arise, Har Tzion. Esa Einai El HaHarim, I will lift my eyes to the mountains, from whence will come my help. Mountains denotes that which transcends the flatness of life, the mundaneness of life. Again, that great message of the Parah Duma, that by sprinkling your blood, your soul in the direction of the Mikdash, you can overcome that death experience which the best of life can never overcome. So that's the story of Edom. And then Aaron has to die. Elazar succeeds him. And the people, all the people, wept for Aaron 30 days. When Moshe dies, it says they wept for him. But not all the people. Aaron is the man of love, of peace. Moshe the man of truth. You need them both. But their heart is a little more with the man of peace, just like it's a little more with mother than father usually. All right, so all the people, it says, Kol ha'eda mourned Aaron when they saw it. And then when the Canaanite, the king of Arad, heard that they came by way of Atarim, that's the way of the spies, when everybody was impressed by the Jews, as we mentioned from the Seporno before. They were counted by names in Bamidbar. That was the generation that was going to take the land. They were the ones who could have taken it without a shot. Once they heard about the spies and that the Jews lost faith, and that Aaron died, then they thought the Jews would be at that moment of discouragement where they could conquer them. So they came out against the Jews, and they vowed to God that we will destroy their idolatrous cities. They won't take the stuff for themselves. There'll be a holy war. And God listened, and they destroyed the Canaanites, and they called it Hormah. And then they had to go all the way around Edom, and the people fetched and became impatient, as I mentioned before. And then they again murmured against God and Moses. Now it's specific. They no longer can pretend that Moses is not doing the will of God. In 21:5, the people spoke against God and against Moses. Why did you bring us up out of Egypt? All right? And they can't stand them on. Then God sent serpents against them. Not God sent. Listen carefully. Vayishlach Hashem ba'am. I'm sorry. Vayishalach Hashem ba'am. Vayishlach would be God sent. Vayishalach is God let them out. It's natural for there to be serpents in the desert. It's described as God taking you through the desert filled with scorpions and serpents. But God artificially held them back. Now God let them go. The word yishalach means to let something go out of its nature. Okay? And then Moshe had to pray for the people and show them a fiery serpent on the pole. That the serpent is basically something which also can lead to God. That same message. That death and the material world can be a means of leading one's soul to eternity in God. When they got that message and looked at it, they were cured even of other diseases they had. Okay? So that's the message of the serpent. And then that bronze serpent, yeah, one second. Yeah, the brass serpent was put away. And in Hezekiah's time, they destroyed it because the people made it into an idol. And Leibovitz draws analogies to the Western Wall. That the holiest object, if it's made an idol, has to be de-idolized. And then they came to Sichon and Og, and they conquered Sichon. They sang to the well. By the way, one commentary says that was Moshe's sin, that they didn't sing when the water came from the rock, that they didn't sing praises to God. That's another version in the Ibn Ezra. So they sang to the well. The people sang when Miriam's well was back with them. And they destroyed Sichon, but Moshe was afraid of Og because he might have merits from having come to Abraham and telling him what happened to Lot. Og is Miyetzer HaRephaim, from those who escaped from that great war of Kedolah Omer, and he did a good deed. And even the worst person, Moshe was worried that his good deed may win him favor in God's eyes more than Moshe has in the Jews. Yeah, quite old, quite big and quite old. Those were the days, my friend. But God said, don't worry, and they conquered that whole area of Sichon and Og and dwelt in their lands. And then they pitched in the plains of Moab at Jericho, and now there's going to be a debacle, a terrible orgy of the new generation, and Pinchas will save the scene. New leadership is emerging, Pinchas and Yoshua, and that is the end of our Parsha, and our Haftorah speaks about Yiftach and his daughter. Okay? Yiftach is a Ben Zonah, the son of